How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. Like the fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head?
Some who serve in the military feel like it'd be a kick in the head if they are forced to get a vaccine. President Biden declared a new goal on Tuesday that 70% of adults will have at least one coronavirus vaccine shot by the 4th of July. The White House is really wrestling with how to send Americans a message. A normal life is within reach if you get vaccinated, but the crisis is far from over, so don't fully relax your guard. One of the things that has gotten under his skin is what's happening with those in the military who don't want to get vaccinated. And how do we know that? Because if you look at some of the surveys that have been done, there was one that I talked about the other week that found that 40% of Marines are not going to take the vaccine. So that would equate to about 48,000 of the 123,000 Marines declining the shot when offered the chance to receive it. In our virtual green room right now, Paul Seegert is with us, and he's a managing partner at PCS Advisers. It's an employee healthcare benefits consulting firm. And check this out. He's in Northern California, but he also served in the Army as a trained Russian intelligence analyst. Paul, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you think happens when it comes to the military? I mean, he's saying he's going to leave it up to the armed forces to decide, but he hasn't ruled out requiring the vaccine. What do you think happens here?
Well, it wouldn't shock me if they did require it, and they would be within their right to do that. When I went into the military, I couldn't count all the vaccines I got on two hands, and I didn't even know what they all were. But that was part of the deal. When I signed up, I was, in a way, I became government property and gave up certain rights. Interestingly, any employer really has the ability to require the vaccine. The difference is, of course, in the private sector, you can choose to not stay employed there a little more easily than when you're in the military.
Yeah,
so it wouldn't shock me if they did require it.
And do you think so? That me either. I don't think that he wants to really push that, though. I think he wants that to be, like when he says he leaves it up to the armed forces, he doesn't want that to blow back on him, so to speak,
right,
for other people to jump on it and say, well, see, here you go again, taking away rights of people who serve the country. But you made a good point. I mean, it is true, right? You sign up, and that's what happens. You become a pincushion, whether you like it or not, and if that becomes mandatory, that's what will happen. And I can't imagine that you would see, I mean, would that, dump numbers even more of people who decide they're not going to go into the military? I don't see that happening.
I don't see that happening too much. I think it's interesting when I look at the whole conversation that we tend to have around the pandemic and vaccination and the vaccine hesitancy, and maybe more specifically herd immunity. We don't talk a lot about the fact that getting who's at high risk, which I think could be a really useful ongoing conversation even after the pandemic about our lifestyle and the chronic illnesses that we've kind of brought upon ourselves. When you look at that group of people in the military, I mean, my whole business is looking at risk. And when you look at the people that are in the military, if they were to be at high risk for complications from COVID or a serious case of COVID, they would really be booted out of the military because they wouldn't meet the physical standards that the military requires. They're, 78% of the people that have serious illness as a result of COVID or were hospitalized or died of COVID were overweight or obese, which they're not allowed to be in the military. So to me, it's an interesting conversation that we're having. It's a very low-risk group. And so maybe it would be better to focus on some of those groups that are high risk, which for the most part have already been vaccinated.
Yeah, and that's interesting in talking about that. And I mentioned, and you said it, you look at risk. So as somebody who does this, who consults for a living, I can imagine that the COVID, the pandemic, the vaccines, all of that has played into what you do a lot, has it?
Absolutely. When we look at the cost of health care in this country, the things that are driving the high risk factors for COVID are the same things that for many years have been accelerating the cost of health care in this country. And that's one part of it. And then another part that we've observed is looking back at this past year and all of the shutdowns that we've gone through and just drastic changes in our lives. Claims were down 70%. Our healthcare providers did a lot less, provided a lot less health care. Hospitals, other than their COVID wards, were largely empty. And so claims were down. Insurance companies actually did fantastic through the COVID era. And the cost that was associated with COVID was really dwarfed by the postponed care, that a lot of which may not reappear in the system.
So when you look at risks, and you mentioned it, being overweight, etc., are there companies, there was a push at one time for a lot of companies to say, hey, we'll give you a free gym membership, we'll do a couple of other things, they call it wellness.
Right.
They didn't flat out call people on, let's get on scales and all of that, but there was incentive to get in shape and to lose weight. Do you think when we come back to whatever this new normal is, as you see from your point of view and what you do, will there be more of that offered again?
Well, I hope there's more focus on wellness, on healthy living, and I think we've seen the power of the media. The mainstream media has really attacked this issue, and I think part of the reason we have the high vaccine hesitancy that we're dealing with is the highly politicized nature of this whole conversation, and that's been unfortunate. We haven't really given people the facts. We've given them the facts we think they need to hear to influence their behavior, and that has changed throughout the process, and that's, I think, increased hesitancy. When these vaccines are a marvel of modern science and are safe and are just overall impressive. It's one of the great feats of our time that we've done this. So I hope we can use that same power that's led to some unfortunate outcomes. If we could learn from that and be willing to have an honest conversation as a country and use that power instead to influence people to make good decisions around their health, that'll play a big role in getting this fifth of our economy that's inflationary under control. Wellness programs specifically is an interesting conversation in and of itself. There really isn't a single program out there that can show and prove an ROI because people they don't change that much. And so, that's kind of an interesting conversation in and of itself. But
right.
We haven't seen measurable results from that.
Yeah, too bad. That would be good if you did. And like you said, health insurance, fifth of the economy, right? Fifth of the economy.
It's massive.
Massive.
And there's so much we can do there that we're not doing. We've never had the political will, unfortunately, and perhaps this is a moment where we could have some of this conversation, regardless of a person's politics, when either party has had the ability to make big systemic changes that could help this problem in terms of the fact that the cost of health care, the payroll deductions that are coming out of people's checks have far outpaced any pay raises they've gotten. It's a huge, huge issue. And all we seem to talk about is expanding access to insurance, but not addressing the real cost of care that's so out of control.
Yeah. Boy, I so agree. We'll have to have you back on and talk about that. And I agree with you on the vaccine. It is a modern marvel. I don't understand the politicalization of this at all. And, as soon as I could do it, I got both of my shots, and I feel great. And I just traveled for the first time, and I've talked to so many other people as well. But I know there's people listening to us that absolutely want nothing to do with the vaccine. There is massive hesitancy for sure.
That's for sure. We're still at 1 in 4 that won't, that say they definitely will not get the vaccine. And I don't want to, what I'm about to say isn't intended to discourage people from getting the vaccine. It's safe. There's 1 in 60,000 people will have some sort of a reaction or incident to it. It's very low. The blood clotting events that we saw with the J&J vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine you're twice as likely to get hit by lightning as to have one of those events. But as a kind of a point of optimism in the whole conversation, you can get immunity from getting the vaccine. You can also get immunity from getting the disease itself. And the CDC's own research, which is amongst the most conservative sources.
Yeah. It shows that you're you're absolutely right. Paul Seegert, thank you so much. You can look him up at PCS Advisers. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.